Welcome back to Math Teacher Institute. Today we are going to talk about factoring, that topic that just never seems to go away. And I'm going to tell you how I was able to break that reteaching cycle with my students. Come on in. I'm Monhar Dalal, and this is Math Teacher Institute. I've been a math teacher for over a decade, both in America and abroad, and I have a master's degree from the Math for Teaching program at Harvard. At Math Teacher Institute, we're going to talk about all the ways we can make our math teaching more effective. As you know, factoring is one of the most important concepts in algebra. And whether you teach algebra or calculus or anything in between, chances are you have experienced the frustration of your students struggling with factoring. And unfortunately, that puts you as a teacher in a really frustrating position where you have a choice between continually reteaching this concept that your students are supposed to know or watching students struggle and fail, not because they couldn't learn the new content, but because they just can't seem to master this old, simple topic that they really desperately need. Today, I'm going to show you my 5-step process that absolutely guarantees success in factoring any quadratic. Factoring is like climbing a mountain. Now, if you go to climb a mountain, there's definitely 2 different ways to get to the top. One way is look at the top and just walk straight at it, right? But that might be tough, right? There might be cliffs and rocks and dangerous areas. You might have to do some rock climbing. It might be really difficult. But that's definitely the shortest and most direct way to the top. However, over there's a path. And if I follow that path, it may wind its way around the mountain, but eventually it ends up at the top. Much longer, but much easier and more reliable and safer, right? Because you know if you take the path, you know you're going to get to the top. So I tell my students this analogy, and it's amazing. It almost does a self-selection process. There are students that are maybe stronger math students, more cerebral, and they really strive to say, no, I want to learn how to go straight to the top of the mountain. And that's our more traditional factoring methods. But the students that have struggled will be running to hear about this easier path off to the side and will be so excited to finally see a method that can help them get to the top. That's what we're going to do now. Let's get started. All right. So here we have a pretty disgusting looking quadratic for us to factor. 6x squared plus 11x minus 10. Now what you'll see in here is me working this problem out on my Microsoft Surface Pro. And if you haven't seen the video about why getting a Microsoft Surface Pro is one of the most transformative things you can do for your math teaching, check out the link to my other video in the description below. All right, let's get started. So this is a 5-step process. The first 2 steps, super easy. So first step is to take a times c. So ax squared plus bx plus c. Take a times c. In this case, we get minus 60. Now the second step, even easier. What is b? b in this case is 11. Now step 3 is the one where students will have a little bit of a challenge. Step 3 is all about finding 2 special numbers. These 2 numbers need to multiply to make negative 60, the answer from part 1. And the same 2 numbers need to add up to make the number from part 2, which is b. So in this case, 2 numbers that multiply to make negative 60, and the same 2 numbers add up to make 11. Now, if your students struggle a little bit with their factor pairs, this is one where you want to just get them in a process of going step by step. 60 and 1, 30 and 2, etc. Now, you may want to stress to them that a times c is negative. Then what you're looking for is a factor pair where the difference between the 2 numbers is equal to b. And if your a times c is positive, then the sum of the 2 numbers should be equal to b. So that's just a little pro tip for how to kind of help them along. But they just work through our factor pairs until in this case we find that our 2 numbers are 15 and 4. And of course, in this case, the 4 needs to be negative. So 15 and negative 4 are the 2 numbers that multiply to make negative 60 and add up to make 11. Once we found these 2 numbers, it's pretty much smooth sailing. So what we're going to do for step 4 is we are going to replace b in our original quadratic with the 2 numbers that we just found. So what we're going to do is we're just going to essentially split that number into these 2 new numbers. So here we have 6x squared plus 15x minus 4x minus 10. Whether you put the 15x first or the minus 4x first, either way, you're still going to come out with the right answer. Doesn't really matter. And now we're going to factor by grouping. So if you are teaching this to students who maybe really struggle with factoring, you may want to do a quick review on factor by grouping. But these are really, really easy factor by grouping problems, so it shouldn't be too much of a challenge for them. So we're going to factor by grouping, remembering to group the negative sign before our third term inside, putting a plus sign in the middle here, just so we don't accidentally mess up our negatives. And we're going to factor out what's in common. So 3x is going to factor out from our first binomial, and negative 2 is going to factor out from our second one. Remember, we want the part left over in the parentheses to be the same in both. So although we could have said factor out 2, that wouldn't have left us with the same thing. So we're going to factor out negative 2 to make them the same. Now, all we have to do is look at each of these parts and say, well, what do these two parts have in common? They have a 2x plus 5 in common, leaving us with 3x minus 2 and 2x plus 5, which is the correct way to factor 6x squared plus 11x minus 10. So this is the process. Like I said, it is definitely longer than the more direct method. But what you can see here is that there's essentially a 100% success rate for this. Step 3, a little bit of a trick there to make sure you find the right two numbers. But it's a very manageable process. It's repeatable. It's systematic. And for students that have struggled potentially for years with factoring, this is something that just seems to work every single time with my students. And hopefully will work really well with yours. So one more time, the 5 steps that we want to work on here are step 1, multiply A times C. Step 2, what is B? Step 3 is find two numbers that multiply to make the number from our first step, and the same two numbers that add up to make the number from our second step. Once we found those two numbers, step 4 is to replace B with those two numbers, essentially splitting B into two parts. And finally, step 5 is factor by grouping. If this video has been helpful for you, please do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click that little bell icon so you can get notified about our new videos every week. If you have a technique for factoring that works really well in your class with your students, share it in the comments below. And if you have any questions about what we did today, post those there too. I'll be happy to get back to you. Also, if you'd like to see a video where I do a proof of why this technique works, let me know in the comments below.